know in how many different directions three spirited girls can move at the same time?
3.
300. And next Saturday while you're playing in the backyard. Oh, Marcia's cooking badge.
For decades, the laugh tracks played, and America smiled at their favorite TV families, never knowing the painful secrets hiding behind those perfectly practiced grins. While sitcom stars brought joy into millions of living rooms each week, many lived double lives that would have destroyed their careers if the truth had been revealed. The studios knew, the casts knew, but the public couldn't know. Not in an era when being gay meant the end of everything you'd worked for. From beloved dads to scene-stealing comic relief characters, these actors built empires on carefully constructed lies, while their real lives remained locked away. Here are 10 shocking stories about sitcom actors who tried to hide their secret gay affairs. Robert Reed played Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch from 1969 to 1974, becoming television's ideal father figure with his architectural blueprints and patient wisdom. Behind the scenes, Reed was living a life of profound unhappiness that his co-star Florence Henderson later described as tragic. Reed was gay in an era when that single fact could obliterate a career, especially for someone playing America's most wholesome dad. He met Robert Benavides on the set of Perry Mason years earlier, but on the Brady Bunch set in 1969, he began a relationship with fellow actor and Korean War veteran who would become his partner, though he kept this completely hidden from the public. Henderson noticed early on that Reed seemed uncomfortable during romantic scenes with her, and he eventually confided the truth to her privately. They worked around it by rehearsing kissing and hugging scenes off camera so they would look more natural when filming. The entire Brady Bunch cast and crew knew about Reed's sexuality, but everyone kept the secret. As Henderson explained to journalists years later, she believed there was simply no way the Brady Bunch could have existed at that time with the public knowing Robert Reed was gay. The show creator Sherwood Schwartz later acknowledged the impossible position Reed was in, saying he sympathized because Reed was the father of America, but couldn't come out of the closet. This tension contributed to Reed's legendary battles with Schwartz over scripts, which Reed felt were too silly and beneath his Shakespearean training. The conflict reached its breaking point during the final episode of the series, when Reed refused to appear in a storyline about hair tonic turning Greg's hair orange, calling it absurd. Schwartz removed Reed from the episode entirely, and it became the series finale. Reed died in 1992 at age 59 from complications related to colon cancer, with his death certificate also indicating he was HIV positive. His TV daughter Susan Olsen later said she believed being gay killed him because keeping the secret forced him to live an unhappy, unfulfilled life, never allowing himself to have a genuine loving relationship. Paul Lynde brought his distinctive voice and campy humor to Bewitched as Uncle Arthur, Samantha's mischievous warlock uncle, who appeared in 10 memorable episodes starting in 1965. While Lynde became one of television's most recognizable personalities, appearing as the center square on Hollywood squares for over a decade, he spent his entire career terrified that confirming his sexuality would destroy everything. Linda was gay at a time when it was not just frowned upon, but could end careers instantly, and he hid this fact from the public for as long as possible. His sexuality was actually the secret behind his success, as his campy, snarky persona poked fun at his closeted homosexuality without ever explicitly acknowledging it. During the 1960s, Lynde had his pilot for a Victorian detective series called Sedgwick Hawk Styles' Prince of Danger, approved by ABC. But according to accounts, his private life resulted in the cancellation of the project. Pop culture historians report that ABC sent Lynde on a promotional tour before the show was announced, but he got drunk at a gay bar and picked up a man who claimed he could do 100 chin-ups. The man attempted to prove this by going out onto a fire escape from Lynde's hotel window, lost his grip while intoxicated, and fell to his death. Lind called producer William Asher, who then called ABC, and the series was canceled. Throughout his career, Lind struggled with alcoholism and deep insecurities about his body, his career, and his social life. Friends later revealed that many of his dates were paid professionals because at least that way he knew he'd get what he wanted, and they'd leave without obligation. In the 1970s, entertainment journalists did not investigate the private lives of performers who were best known as game show regulars. So a 1976 People magazine article on Lind described Stan Feinsmith only as his hairstylist, suite-mate, and chauffeur bodyguard. During Lind's lifetime, this was as close as the media came to hinting at his homosexuality. A friend who published a biography years later stated that being gay and having to hide it frustrated him tremendously. Lind died alone in his bed in 1982 after suffering a heart attack at age 55, never having publicly acknowledged the truth about his life. Dick Sargent joined Bewitched in 1969 as the second actor to play Darren Stevens, replacing Dick York, who left due to severe back problems. What most viewers never knew was that Sargent had originally been offered the role back in 1964, but couldn't accept it because of contractual obligations to Universal Studios. By the time York's health forced him to leave the show, Sargent was finally free to take the part he'd missed 5 years earlier. Like his co-stars Paul Lind and reportedly Agnes Moorehead, Sargent was gay, making Bewitched one of the most quietly queer shows in television history, despite its wholesome suburban exterior. Sargent remained closeted throughout his time on the show and for decades afterward, living what he later described as a life lived in fear of being found out. He had been in a loving relationship with a man he publicly identified only as Frank for 20 years until Frank died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1979. It pained Sargent deeply that he couldn't speak openly about their bond and had to call the love of his life a business associate. To maintain his cover, he cooperated with media speculation about romantic involvement with women, even posing with actress Connie Francis for pictures that appeared in movie fan magazines. As Sargent recalled in 1991, they looked passionately at each other for the camera, but that was the only time he ever saw her. In October 1991, Sargent chose National Coming Out Day to publicly declare his homosexuality, motivated partly by California Governor Pete Wilson's veto of a bill to protect gay people from job discrimination, and partly because a tabloid called The Star had already outed him with false claims about trashing a house with a lover. Sargent found coming out liberating, saying it was such a relief after living in fear and that it gave him a whole new mission in life. In June 1992, he served as Grand Marshal of the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade, alongside his former Bewitched co-star, Elizabeth Montgomery, who remained a close friend and supporter. Sargent died from prostate cancer on July 8, 1994, at age 64, having spent his final years living openly with his partner, Albert Williams. Montgomery, who died less than a year later, called him a great friend whose love, sense of humor, and remarkable courage she would always miss. Jim Nabors became beloved to millions as the simple-minded but good-hearted Gomer Pyle, first on The Andy Griffith Show and then on his own spin-off series, Gomer Pyle, USMC, which ran from 1964 to 1969. What audiences didn't know was that Nabors was gay and living a secret life that would eventually collide with Hollywood rumors in the most bizarre way. In the early 1970s, a group described as middle-aged gay men in Huntington Beach sent out joke invitations to their annual party that read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding reception of Rock Hudson and Jim Nabors." The joke was that Hudson would take Nabors' character's last name and become Rock Pyle, but those who didn't get the humor spread it as fact. A fan magazine picked up the story and ran an item alluding to the wedding of two same-sex stars without naming names. The rumor spread across the country and became so prominent that both stars had to address it in the national press, with Nabors calling it horrible, a nightmare, and a vicious, unfounded, and unwarranted story. He publicly denied being gay at the time, saying he'd been so busy with his career that he really hadn't given marriage much thought. The scandal was taken so seriously that neighbors in Hudson, who according to both men were never more than casual friends, never spoke to each other again after the rumors broke. The incident hurt both careers, with Neighbors' variety show being canceled shortly afterward, though Hudson continued working. The irony was painful because both men were indeed gay, but living in terror of that fact becoming public knowledge. Neighbors had actually been in a relationship with Stan Cadwallader, a Honolulu firefighter, since 1975, but kept this completely private for decades. It wasn't until January 2013, shortly after Washington State legalized same-sex marriage, that Neighbors at age 82 traveled to Seattle with Cadwallader to finally marry his partner of 38 years. In interviews afterward, Neighbors said he'd never made a public spectacle of his sexuality and had been open about it with coworkers and friends in Hollywood, but never acknowledged it to the media. He explained that he and Cadwallader had made their vows to each other decades earlier, and the legal marriage just solidified something they'd already committed to long ago. Neighbors died at his Honolulu home on November 30th, 2017, at age 87, having finally lived the last few years of his life openly and honestly. Raymond Burr played defense attorney Perry Mason from 1957 to 1966, and then in 26 television movies from 1985 to 1993, becoming one of television's most iconic leading men. But Burr's personal life was built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies designed to hide the fact that he was gay. Burr invented an entire bogus history for himself that included claims of early marriages to two women who never existed, a son who died in tragic circumstances that never happened, and military service that was never confirmed. He even claimed to have had a romantic relationship with actress Natalie Wood, who later laughed the idea to scorn when asked about it years after his death. The public was interested in this veteran actor's personal life as Perry Mason grew more popular, but Burr deflected questions with vague references to his brief real marriage to actress Isabella Ward, which had indeed occurred but ended quickly. When pressed about other relationships, he would simply say, "I don't discuss that," so many times that reporters eventually gave up and relied on rehashing his fabricated stories as fact. The truth was that Burr met Robert Benavides, a struggling actor and Korean War veteran, on the set of Perry Mason in 1957, and they began living together in 1960. According to some reports, they secretly married in 1963, with Burr reportedly enjoying playing the role of Benavides' wife. A friend later revealed that if you went to their house, Burr would be wearing a frilly pink apron doing the ironing, fussing around like the woman of the house, and calling Benavides "my husband." They remained together for over 35 years, building a vast business empire that included orchid cultivation, winemaking, real estate holdings in Los Angeles, Hawaii, and a South Pacific island. These business interests enabled them to live like royalty while keeping the true nature of their relationship secret from all but their closest friends. Barbara Hale, who played Della Street on Perry Mason, knew about Burr's sexuality and remained supportive throughout his life and beyond. When Burr became terminally ill with kidney cancer in 1993, he returned to their Sonoma ranch to spend his final days. On September 12, 1993, Burr awoke from a morphine haze, turned to Benavides, and asked about the status of the ranch's Chardonnay grapes, the livestock, and his beloved orchids before passing away at age 76. Only after his death did books and articles start printing the truth about the elaborate conspiracy to hide his homosexuality, a conspiracy that had been complete and total throughout his lifetime. Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins were two of the most popular leading men of Hollywood's golden age in the 1950s, marketed to fans as wholesome heartthrobs who released pop music and starred in major films. What the studios desperately tried to hide was that Hunter and Perkins were in a romantic relationship that lasted several years at the height of their fame. Hunter, born Arthur Kelm, had been discovered by an agent after being discharged from the Coast Guard for enlisting while underage, and he was soon taken on by Agent Henry Wilson, who also represented the closeted Rock Hudson. Hunter's sexuality was somewhat of an open secret in Hollywood, and when he left Wilson for a different agent, Wilson retaliated by giving Gossip Magazine Confidential a story about Hunter being arrested at a party for gay men, though this was done to kill a bigger story about Hudson. The incident didn't damage Hunter's career much, and he went on to star in major films like Damn Yankees in 1958. Hunter met Perkins at the Chateau Marmont in 1956, shortly after Perkins had earned a Golden Globe and Oscar nomination for his second film, Friendly Persuasion. Though Perkins wasn't publicly out, he had a level of notoriety within the gay actor community for starring in a Broadway production of Tea and Sympathy in 1954, where he played a gay character. As Hunter told interviews decades later, they just chatted and got along, and soon they were starting to see each other regularly. However, they discovered they had different attitudes toward their careers, with Perkins being far more career-focused and ambitious than Hunter. The relationship soured when both actors competed for the lead role in Fear Strikes Out, a film about baseball player Jim Pearsall's struggle with mental illness. Hunter saw the role as an opportunity to prove himself as a dramatic actor, but Perkins got the part, which Hunter experienced as a betrayal. Hunter told interviewers he felt really disappointed by that, and it made a difference to their relationship. Though they didn't break up immediately, the relationship never recovered, and they eventually drifted apart. 2 years after their split, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho turned Perkins into a household name as Norman Bates. According to multiple accounts, Paramount Studio President Barney Balaban objected to Perkins's homosexuality and his relationship with Hunter, allegedly pressuring Perkins to end the relationship and undergo conversion therapy. Hunter later reported that Perkins was ending a long relationship with dancer Grover Dale and had begun conversion therapy with psychologist Mildred Newman in an attempt to become heterosexual. Hunter didn't come out publicly until 2005, when he published his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, over a decade after he'd retired from acting. He went on to have a relationship with his partner of over 35 years, film producer Alan Glazer. Perkins married actress Barry Berenson and had 2 sons, though accounts from friends and colleagues generally characterized him as homosexual rather than bisexual throughout his life. Perkins died from complications related to AIDS in 1992 at age 60. Hunter passed away in 2018 at age 86, having finally told the story of his forbidden romance with one of Hollywood's most famous stars. Charles Nelson Reilly became a household name not for his Tony Award-winning Broadway performances, but for his outrageous personality as a regular panelist on Match Game from 1973 to 1979, and occasional appearances on Hollywood Squares. With his distinctive glasses, pageboy cap, and ever-present pipe, Reilly was a scene stealer who lampooned himself by affecting a deep voice to say, "Yo!" and describing how butch his alter ego, Chuck, was, all while being as campy as possible. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Reilly later said he never purposely hid being gay from anyone, though he also never explicitly confirmed it publicly until his 2000 autobiographical one-man show, Save It for the Stage, The Life of Reilly. Reilly recalled that early in his career, a network executive told him bluntly, "They don't let queers on television," which made his subsequent success all the more remarkable. He became a game show fixture, appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson more than 95 times, earned an Emmy nomination for his work on The Ghost and Mrs. Muir from 1968 to 1970, and even appeared on Saturday morning children's shows. Much like Paul Lynde, Riley gave obvious signals of a campy gay persona on camera while maintaining silence about his personal life off camera. Magazine and newspaper profiles throughout the 1970s and 80s did not mention his personal life at all. Behind the scenes, Riley had been in a relationship with Patrick Hughes, a set decorator and dresser he met backstage while appearing on the game show Battlestars, though their partnership was not revealed publicly during Riley's lifetime. They lived together in Beverly Hills for many years. In addition to his game show work, Riley was an accomplished director who earned a Tony nomination in 1997 for directing Julie Harris in a revival of The Gin Game. And he was a beloved acting teacher whose students included Bette Midler, Lily Tomlin, Liza Minnelli, and Christine Lottie. Despite his success proving the network executive wrong, Riley sometimes felt that his game show fame overshadowed his more serious theatrical work. He once said, "You can't do anything else once you do game shows. You have no career," though his directing and teaching work contradicted this. Riley's final years were spent touring with his acclaimed autobiographical show, which was eventually filmed as an independent documentary. He developed respiratory problems during filming and retired immediately after the final day of shooting. Riley died of complications from pneumonia on May 25, 2007, at age 76. His openness about his sexuality, even while never making it a public spectacle during the height of his fame, was considered groundbreaking for an era when most entertainers remained deeply closeted. Bewitched ran on ABC from 1964 to 1972, becoming one of the most successful sitcoms of its era, with its charming story of a witch trying to live as a normal suburban housewife. What made the show particularly interesting in retrospect was that it featured what might have been television's gayest cast, with multiple gay actors playing major roles while remaining closeted. Dick Sargent played the second Darren, Paul Lynde played Uncle Arthur, George Tobias, who played neighbor Abner Kravitz, was reportedly gay, and there were rumors about Agnes Moorehead, who played Endora. The show's premise about Samantha hiding her true identity to fit into suburban society resonated with gay audiences on a level that straight viewers likely never understood. Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha, explained years later that prejudice was a central idea she wanted the series to explore, with Samantha's identity as a witch functioning as a metaphor for any group deemed other by society. The conflict was never really about magic itself, Montgomery said, but about whether people could accept one another for who they truly were. In this sense, Bewitched was quietly radical long before other sitcoms began confronting social issues more directly. Montgomery was aware of her co-star's sexuality and was supportive, particularly of Dick Sargent, with whom she developed a close friendship. When Sargent came out in 1991, Montgomery stood by him completely, even serving as co-grand marshal with him at the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade in 1992. The irony was that all these actors were living the same kind of double life that Samantha lived on screen, hiding their true selves to better fit into society's expectations. The magic wasn't just in the special effects, but in how the show managed to explore themes of acceptance and tolerance, while its own cast members lived in fear of exposure. It took decades after the show ended for the truth to emerge about just how many of Bewitched's beloved characters were played by actors hiding in plain sight, bringing a whole new layer of meaning to the show's message about accepting people for who they really are. Dick Sargent's path to living openly was particularly complicated by the elaborate cover stories he created during his decades in the closet. During the 1970s, he appeared on the game show Tattletales with comedian Fannie Flagg as his partner, a show that quizzed celebrity couples about secrets in their relationship. The deep irony was that both Sargent and Flagg were gay, but this was the secret they would never reveal on the program or anywhere else at that time. To maintain his straight image, Sargent had manufactured a wife to the press in the early days of his career to protect himself from suspicion. He also escorted starlets to Hollywood parties and allowed speculation about romantic relationships with actresses to flourish, all while his real relationship with Frank remained hidden. Sargent later said that having to keep Frank a secret and call him a business associate was one of the most painful aspects of living in the closet. After Frank's death in 1979, Sargent was alone for years before eventually finding love again with Albert Williams, who became his partner in 1986. When tabloid The Star outed him in 1991 with fabricated stories about him and Williams trashing a house and being evicted, Sargent decided enough was enough. He acknowledged being gay, but sued over the false claims about the house incident. His decision to come out on National Coming Out Day that October was driven partly by anger at Governor Wilson's veto and partly by concern about the high rate of suicide among young gay people. Sargent wanted to help save lives by being visible, saying he hoped his example would make a difference. He was especially pleased by the positive reaction from friends after coming out, particularly from Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founder of the Special Olympics, who assured him that she welcomed his continued participation in the organization for which he'd worked for 2 decades. Sargent jokingly referred to himself as a retroactive role model, acknowledging that while he hadn't been brave enough to come out during his career, at least he could serve as an example in his later years. The support he received, especially from Elizabeth Montgomery and other bewitched cast members, validated his decision and made his final years much happier than the decades he'd spent hiding. Robert Reed's relationship with the Brady Bunch kids extended beyond the television screen in ways that revealed both his genuine affection for them and his complicated feelings about the show that made him famous. Reed personally paid for a trip to New York and London for his television children, treating them to cultural experiences he felt would enrich their lives. He bought them Super 8 cameras one Christmas to encourage their creativity and took them to England to teach them about Shakespeare, whether they wanted to learn or not. Barry Williams, who played Greg Brady, said they had a wonderful relationship for decades, though they never discussed Reed's sexuality, even as adults. After the Brady Bunch ended, Reed finally got the more serious dramatic roles he'd been craving during his sitcom years, earning Emmy nominations for his work in the miniseries Roots and Rich Man, Poor Man, and for the series Medical Center. Notably, he won critical acclaim in 1975 for portraying a doctor who comes out as transgender in a 2-part episode of Medical Center, a role that earned him a Primetime Emmy nomination and allowed him to explore themes he couldn't address in his own life. At the end of his life, Reed found his greatest fulfillment teaching Shakespeare at UCLA, with friends saying it was the happiest he'd ever been. The tragedy was that Reed spent his entire career unable to be himself, creating frustration that manifested as anger over silly scripts and conflicts with producers. Florence Henderson's observation that she believed Bob's forced double life dissipated a lot of anger and frustration spoke to the enormous psychological toll of hiding who you really are for decades. His TV daughter, Susan Olsen, put it even more bluntly years after his death, writing that Reed was blessed to have been a father figure to the Brady kids, but that he could never make peace with himself because his homosexuality was so taboo. She wrote that he never allowed himself to have a genuine love and was forever taunted by his own disdain for the natural inclinations he was born with. Olsen believed that if Reed had been allowed to form a relationship with another man, he would have been the best husband ever and might still be alive. When Reed became terminally ill in 1992, he called Henderson weeks before his death to ask her to inform the rest of the Brady Bunch cast that he was dying. He passed away at age 59, with his death certificate indicating both colon cancer and HIV as contributing factors, though this information wasn't made public until years later. The era of closeted sitcom actors reflected a broader system in Hollywood where studios actively participated in hiding the sexuality of their stars through arranged marriages, fabricated romances, and carefully controlled publicity. These so-called lavender marriages were unions between one or more gay, lesbian, or bisexual people designed to hide their sexual orientation from the public. Rock Hudson's marriage to his agent secretary Phyllis Gates in 1955 was among the most speculated examples, lasting only 2 years before separation once rumors of his homosexuality began to spread. William Haynes, an actor in the 1920s and 30s, was given an ultimatum by MGM to either marry a woman or be dropped from the studio. But he chose his male partner instead and left Hollywood to become a successful interior designer. The system extended to sitcom actors as well, though some like Robert Reed and Raymond Burr simply invented deceased wives rather than going through with fake marriages. The publicists and studios created elaborate mythologies around their stars' personal lives, and entertainment journalists of the era generally didn't investigate too deeply, especially for performers known primarily for game shows or television rather than major films. This conspiracy of silence allowed stars to maintain their careers, but at enormous personal cost, forcing them to live in constant fear while lying to the public who loved them. The studios justified this system as protecting their investments, but it created generations of performers who never got to live authentically and often died having never publicly acknowledged their true selves. When these actors finally did come out, whether during their lifetimes like Dick Sargent or posthumously like Robert Reed, it revealed just how pervasive the secrecy had been and how many beloved television personalities had been hiding in plain sight all along, bringing joy to millions while living lives of quiet desperation behind the scenes.